The Art of Arkham Horror is a hardback art book showcasing the illustrations of the Arkham Horror Files universe from Fantasy Flight Games.
Hang on a minute, didn't they already do an art book?
You are correct, Lita, but that came out 15 years ago. Because multiple new games have been released since then, and as most art is now digital as opposed to physical, it is definitely time for an update.
I don't know, sounds like a cash grab to me.
Well, you aren't in the old version, but...
Ooh, this is a great book, you should go out and buy it right away.
The Art of Arkham Horror is available as a physical or Kindle publication. It has 192 pages devoted to the art of the Arkham Horror Files universe from Fantasy Flight Games. This is actually published by Dark Horse and is second in a trilogy of books including the Keyforge and Android universes. If you want a preview, then the Amazon and Dark Horse websites have a few sample pages. Both previews are different, with the Dark Horse one having slightly larger images, but the Amazon site has the table of contents and the introduction by Brian Schomburg. Brian is one of the many lower-profile FFG employees whose name has appeared in a million credits that you have never bothered to read. You probably know him as the chap who wrote the Arkham Horror design notes. And wait a minute, is he the same chap whose name appears in the previous art book, or is that some ancient ancestor? Anyway, let's open this up and see what's inside. Thankfully, for an art book, the first thing you see is lots of art, which most of you will be familiar with. Now we come to the credits page, whose names you probably won't recognize unless you read a lot of Dark Horse comics. But tucked away are your favourite FFG game designers. What is interesting is this great description of the book provided to the Library of Congress, which is actually different to any of the marketing blurbs. Next is the table of contents in lovely large print. As you can see, like the previous art book, they have grouped everything into loose categories. There are 7 chapters of similar length. Moving on, we have the foreword by Brian S., FFG's Visual Creative Director. Didn't he used to paint Spellfire cards back in the day? We begin with 26 pages all about the titular city of Arkham, mostly from the living card game. There are full page, half page, and quarter page illustrations throughout all the chapters. In fact, there are all kinds of weird sizes, allowing the maximum amount of art on the page. Which is a great leap forward from the huge areas of white space that plagued the previous book. Well done, Brian! With some very rare exceptions, art will only bleed across the title pages of each new chapter. Every piece has an on-page credit where possible, which is so much more convenient than an index. Helpfully, the Legend-Haunted Arkham chapter also has the title of each piece so you can tell which location they are depicting. There are also little snippets of flavor text dotted about, some from the original Mythos authors and some from other FFG products. These are more atmospheric than instructive, with just a fraction of the canon material being reproduced. This is an art book, not a gazetteer after all. The majority of art will come from the LCG. That's because the board games don't actually feature a lot of art, except on things like box covers, and you can see a lot of the recent ones here, along with maybe some card backs. Conspicuously absent are any of the astounding works that Jacobus Wagintast created to illustrate Arkham for the 3rd edition board game, although his other works are present, so it probably wasn't anything personal. We didn't see any Unfathomable or Edge of the Earth art in here either, and we don't know if FFG chose the images for this book or if Dark Horse did. If you are looking for a specific piece of art, there is no index, and the chapters take a very scattershot approach. For instance, Miskatonic University, probably the most famous of Arkham locations, does not in fact appear in the Arkham section, but in Chapter 3, The Known and the Unknown. The Investigators too, probably the most iconic and recognizable images of this IP, are scattered throughout the book as opposed to a convenient Personalities of Arkham chapter. And most of them are tiny, thus encouraging you to purchase FFG's own Investigators of Arkham Horror book. Handily, some topics are grouped together like this double page of Carcosa images. But guess which chapter it is in? No, not the obvious Journeys Beyond, but the generic Art of Terror. Despite the fact that most LCG art is landscape, not once do they use the full dimensions of a page and encourage you to turn the book through 90 degrees. Perhaps they are afraid of lawsuits from anyone putting their back out handling such a hefty tome. This means that any time they want to fill a whole page, they must choose art that was deliberately created as a portrait. No, not the amazing investigator portraits. Well, not often, but things like the novella covers. Pieces whose minimalist art style look great at their original size, but actually look worse when blown up larger. Whereas images packed with detail which benefit from being as large as possible are only allowed 2/3 of their potential. It's probably all TikTok's fault as millennials no longer have rotatable wrists or something. Another observation is the lack of early art. This work could have been a great historical record, not only looking pretty but educational as well, allowing you insight into not only how FFG games have changed, but how art techniques and media have evolved over the last 30 years. Other art books have been using chronological layout very successfully for years. It is great having Atlak Nacha getting his own section, but why not include the original depictions to see how far we have come? Or better still, with the investigators who sometimes started life as generic background art before being given a name and identity. Maybe FFG don't want to reproduce things from the earlier book. Maybe it is part of the Dark Horse license agreement, or possibly they just want to put these elderly ancestors into the attic and pretend they don't exist. Much like cutting out the artist bios that appeared in the earlier book. Speaking of cutting, there is a lot of cropping in this book, which should surely be the last thing you would associate with a book dedicated to celebrating nothing but the art. Here is one of the oldest pieces to appear in this book, but it is shocking how much has been removed from the original image. And hey look, it is a portrait work that could easily have been reproduced full size, much more deserving than something like this for example.
Alright now, think of your blood pressure, stick to the facts.
Finishing up with some physical details, this is a hardback volume measuring approximately 24 by 31 by 2 centimeters, or roughly 9 by 12 by 1 inch thick, which is a similar size to other FFG hardbacks you may already have on your shelf. It is case bound and so the pages are fully stitched in place. There is no page ribbon unfortunately, and also no dust jacket. Which is a shame as the waxed cover will definitely show scuffs and finger marks no matter how careful you are. There is UV spot glass on the front and spine. Our copy arrived shrink wrapped and with this loose leaf giving some product description and preview images for the uninitiated. In summary, this book is purely intended to deliver art in the maximum quantity. This is the sledgehammer of art books, and not just because of the weight either. This is the kind of book you give an Arkham Files fan as you don't want to get them an expansion they already have, or that you ask for as an Arkham Files fan as Granny won't have a clue what a Mythos pack was but probably still has book tokens left over from the 1960s. Plus this should be available from literally anywhere books are sold.